Right-sizing standards for your organization's 3D modeling goals. How right-sized standards delivered faster rebuild. In August 2020, a facility near Firebag, Alberta caught fire. In a region where wildfires are common, this type of incident can happen anytime during the season. The fire damaged many parts of the facility, forcing a rebuild in many areas. Fortunately, the company had an up-to-date 3D model, which allowed the team to quickly generate piping isometrics and order or fabricate the components needed for the site construction. Because the 3D model was well maintained, project and engineering teams did not need to go on site to perform their remote work, avoiding additional cost and delays. The facility's former director of Asset Information Management noted that the hot bitumen tank piping design created by the Business Unit Project BUP team minimized production loss. The updated model also cut the rebuilding time by nearly half, saving significant time and money from the ability to generate isometrics, spool drawings, MTOs, and other deliverables from the 3D model. Asset Information Management and 3D Modeling. Asset information has a direct impact on your business. Decisions about safety, maintenance, engineering, projects, and finance depend on having high-quality asset information available. However, managing asset information can be challenging because it exists in different formats, silos, owned by different functional groups or applications across an asset's entire life cycle. Asset Information Management, AIM, enables your company to ensure that high-quality asset data is accessible when needed. It is also foundational to support preventative maintenance and increased reliability/uptime, as well as enable digital transformation and reduce headcount across an organization. One of the first things to know about AIM is which standards are typically included in its umbrella. Here are some common standards you'll find with AIM: tag numbering, document numbering and revisioning, plant breakdown structure, PBS, 2D or 3D modeling requirements, project handover requirements. In this article, we'll dive into how ReVisionz helps companies develop and implement right-sized 3D modeling standards that drive measurable value across an asset's lifecycle. We work with clients to define the right level of detail, align standards with business goals, and ensure models are practical to maintain and use. This approach reduces cost and complexity, improves MOC and maintenance efficiency, and ensures asset information remains accurate and valuable long after a project is complete. Understanding right-sized standards. Right-sized means that the 3D model isn't too complex and isn't too ambiguous either. If a 3D modeling standard is too ambiguous and not approached with rigor, it creates an opportunity for too much interpretation. This allows users of the standard to interpret and implement it in many ways. This creates a lot of wasted time because team members can go back and forth to decipher the original meaning of the specifications. If the number of attributes or properties that an object in the 3D model requires is unclear, it will make reporting or performing QA or QC daunting. On the other hand, overly complex 3D modeling standards are exponentially expensive to implement and maintain effectively. Most mom-and-pop businesses likely can't adhere to the requirements put forth by complex 3D models. Finding the right fit is critical for long-term success. For example, if you have 1 million objects in a 3D model but want 10 versus 50 attributes for each object, it will cause issues with performance, viewing or sharing, and your ability to effectively maintain and sustain the content. It will also require more resources, people, and OPEX to keep it as built. The usefulness of the 3D model needs to be weighed against the requirements, as this is where hidden layers and functional or business requirements come into play. Adding requirements that don't provide you with any additional value means you're just giving extra work to the EPC contractor, which inflates your overall cost of the project. If you don't have a use case for those requirements during the project and into the O&M phase, you shouldn't include them in your 3D models/objects. There are many ways to relate and connect data that is not authored in a 3D modeling tool without having to hard-code it into the model. We'll talk more about why right-sized, fit-for-purpose standards are so important in the following sections. Relevant industry standards and why AM matters. Key process industry standards. Before we go deeper, we should learn more about the standards we're covering in this article. There are a number of different standards that are applicable to the process industry. Here are two industry standards that can be commonly found in oil and gas. Capital Facilities, Information Handover Specification, CFOS. This standard defines physical equipment classes and properties. ECL, equipment. Class library and document types. And classes. DCL, document class. Library requirements for project handover. Facility lifecycle. 3D model. Standard. FL3DMS. This standard takes the equipment class content from CFOS and marries it with a 3D modeling standard. It is much newer than CFOS, but is being adopted by owner-operators on new capital projects for a foundation for 3D model requirements. Note that these two standards are just the baseline. They're probably not targeted nor specific enough to your project, asset, or facility, so you need to enhance them and make them your own. The pitfalls of overstandardization. Overstandardization occurs when standards include requirements the company cannot realistically report on or maintain. This adds complexity that drives up cost and delays schedules. The two biggest risks are cost and schedule impacts. Every added requirement increases EPC workload, and unclear standards make it worse by forcing repeated back and forth to interpret the 3D specifications. This extra work drives up EPC costs and extends project timelines, often without adding any real value to the client. How overstandardization hurts your company. Here's an example of how overstandardization hurts a company. An operator requires more than 80 attributes for every piping component in a 3D model. EPC teams spend months filling in fields that have no clear purpose. The model grows so heavy that it slows to a crawl. Designers wait minutes for drawings to load. Engineers avoid the model because it takes too long to work with, and operations teams cannot open it without high-end workstations they do not have. To keep the project moving, EPCs strip data out before handover. In the process, critical maintenance and operations information disappears. The client inherits a model that looks impressive, but is missing the details needed to support day-to-day work. Rebuilding that information later costs millions and drains confidence in the model. This example shows why streamlining 3D models is critical. A right-sized approach avoids unnecessary cost and frustration while keeping the model practical to use, simple to maintain, and valuable throughout the asset lifecycle. The importance of right-sizing standards. What is right-sizing in the context of AIM? Right-sizing means defining standards with only the level of detail and functionality that provide measurable value. The Firebag facility rebuild is a perfect example of this in action. Because their 3D model was right-sized and consistently maintained, the team could quickly generate accurate piping isometrics, order components, and rebuild with minimal field modifications. Standards that were practical to maintain, rather than overly complex, ensured the model was always up to date and ready when it mattered most. Achieving this level of readiness requires planning for both current and future needs. If your long-term goal includes hosting 3D models, for example, seed files become essential to keep models consistent, even when different EPCs handle them. Seed files make it easier to ingest EPC-developed models into your host model, which can represent many areas of your facility and allow multiple teams to work on different parts simultaneously. Without seed files and a solid hosting strategy, running concurrent projects may not be possible. Right-size standards set companies up for long-term success by capturing 3D model and data requirements up front, even if those capabilities are not needed immediately. This gives you the flexibility to pivot and expand your digital journey later without costly rework. For example, even if you are not yet hosting or managing 3D models internally, Asking EPCS for backups after a project ensures you have them when you are ready. ReVisionz helps companies plan for this future state by developing right-size standards that balance current needs with long-term goals. Our approach ensures 3D models are practical to maintain, cost-effective to sustain, and ready to support advanced use cases like digital twins and predictive maintenance when your organization is prepared to adopt them. Best practices. Right-size standards align with both immediate needs and long-term goals, ensuring 3D models are practical to maintain today and ready to support future digital initiatives. ReVisionz helps companies achieve this by defining the end goal, working with stakeholders to determine whether 3D models need to be hosted internally, viewed for reference, or shared across facilities or business units. Assessing the current state, reviewing existing asset information, identifying gaps, and evaluating how current standards support or hinder future goals. Building a roadmap, working backwards from the desired future state to define right-size standards that are achievable and scalable. Developing a phased budget and strategy, prioritizing practicality and long-term value to avoid unnecessary cost and complexity while setting the foundation for advanced use cases like digital twins and predictive maintenance. To achieve this balance, ReVisionz combines deep AIM expertise with proven methodologies to design standards that reduce cost and complexity today while making sure that they continue to deliver value as digital capabilities expand. Right-sizing for long-term success. Without verifications and measures, standards aren't very useful on their own. If you have requirements without verifications and measures, an EPC could make the 3D model look right, but the attributes and properties may not be valid. Even if the model looks fine, every single one of those elements could be inconsistent or incorrect. The right sizing of standards is essential because you need to keep your eyes on the ultimate goal. Overly complicated standards that include everything will cost you a lot of money and time, because the more requirements you add, the more work your EPC has to do. Underdeveloped models are less useful, self-evidently. If you don't have a right-sized 3D modeling standard, you should develop one. Without this, EPC firms are going to determine the direction of the model. You can determine how your 3D models are built with clear standards, ensuring everything meets your expectations. Switching EPCs won't be an issue either because you don't have to redo work if you have the standards for them to work from. Don't have the expertise to build your own 3D modeling standards? We've got you covered. Reach out to ReVisionz, and let's talk about building a 3D modeling standard that works for your company.